intend to talk on this issue today, but I feel compelled to because this issue of alcohol has been the bread and butter of my political life for a very, very long time. I've been around and seen and watched the development of different alcohol strategies over the many years, and I think I'm well placed to gauge and give a reasonable assessment of what's worked and what hasn't worked over the years from an Alice Springs perspective. The thing with alcohol strategies is that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And whilst people might think that a territory-wide alcohol action plan, I just heard the member for Johnston mention that, whilst that might sound like a good idea, I don't think that works particularly well. And I think that when you look across the length and breadth of the Northern Territory over the last 20 years, most areas, most regional areas, centres have had their own approach with the same sorts of ingredients but in different measures. But in terms of Alice Springs, I've always said that the people of Alice Springs are the experts when it comes to alcohol policy. They are the experts in what works and doesn't work. And it's all very well for people to come in and make decisions and judgments around what will be best for us. But when you live it and breathe it, and there's people in this chamber that know exactly what I'm talking about for their own communities as well as mine in Alice Springs, it's a little offensive because people who don't understand a community don't necessarily get it right or even close to right. And we've seen that happen in Alice Springs over the years. But there are some things that work. There's a whole range of things that have been tried over the years. I don't think any of us need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to alcohol policy because there's enough experience and data out there to direct us as to what works and what doesn't work. And I guess probably the reason why I wanted to stand up tonight is because there are things that different governments have done that absolutely have worked. And the first one that comes to mind in Alice Springs, of course, is police outside of bottle shops. We've seen lots of different iterations of that over the years. It started as police outside of bottle shops, it turned to powleys, posies, God knows what else. But the principle of having police stand outside of bottle shops has been controversial for the whole time, but it's probably the single most effective strategy of reducing alcohol harm and supply that we've seen in Alice Springs, and that's why successive governments have kept it in there, despite the fact that at times it looks like it's sort of not as effective as what it used to be. But we know that with full coverage of our 10 takeaway liquor outlets in Alice Springs, that works. And that was an initiative brought in initially by the Henderson Labor government in 2011, and I remember that distinctly because I was standing outside of Pigley's with my sign campaigning, and I can remember seeing these coppers there and thinking, wow, that's interesting, and that was sort of the start of the whole concept of having police outside of bottle shops. We saw different phases. I remember Gunner. Chief Minister Gunner decided for a while that it was an operational issue for the police, and the coverage of those bottle shops lapsed for a couple of years almost, and that caused a lot of destruction in the town. But by doing that, by taking things away and stopping things, you get a clear picture of whether it works or not. So in a sort of backhanded, destructive way, Michael Gunner, the Chief Minister, demonstrated to us very clearly that police outside of bottle shops work. The other thing that's worked really well in Alice Springs is taking certain products off the shelf, and we heard someone talk about how We don't have cask wine. We haven't had cask wine in town for years. And limiting access to certain products. That is very effective. The whole issue of fortified wines, that was a big, an enormous problem in town back, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. The incidence of people presenting to the hospital, the emergency department with pancreatitis was through the roof. And by taking away access basically to fortified wine, pancreatitis almost disappeared. And you would remember that member for 𝙲𝙀 and different people that were around at that time. It was a really successful initiative. No one's ever backtracked on that. No one has ever stood up and said, oh, we need to have access to fortified wines, greater access, because there was just that unquestionable proof that that was a no-brainer, that worked. And having cask wine taken out of the equation, that worked too. And there's lots of other examples. And of course now, you know, rolling forward many years, we've got reduced opening hours in Alice Springs, and although that's not particularly palatable to most of us, I think most people do agree that that's provided a break, an important break every week, Mondays and Tuesdays, although whenever I go away, I think, my goodness me, how do we survive in Alice Springs, you know, when you experience the exact opposite of what we have in Alice, where you've got almost unlimited opening hours of bottle shops elsewhere. But the point I'm trying to make is that clearly some strategies work well and others don't. And the underlying premise of all this is that alcoholics will access alcohol no matter what, and in any way they can. So when it comes to the minimum floor price, the minimum unit price, I've never been sold on it. We have an amazing liquor accord in Alice Springs. It's been operating for probably close to 20 years now, and they took it upon themselves many years ago to basically implement a floor price, but get rid of really cheap, tacky grog. I can remember years ago there was a spate of alcohol sold from plastic containers. I don't know if people can remember that. It was just gross. These pallets of Chardonnay sold in plastic containers, and they were sold for a couple of dollars, and they were just walking out, and the proprietors that were selling them just couldn't keep up with it. And once again, the health implications for that were dire. So through this accord, these sensible, responsible takeaway shop, bottle shop owners and liquor outlet owners got together and made some sensible decisions around what products they shouldn't sell, and they pretty much set a floor price, but I don't think I don't know that they actually called it that. But we had a sort of Clayton's floor price put in years ago by the local liquor accord, and that group of people have continued to demonstrate a great sense of responsibility and cooperation when it comes to the sale of alcohol in our town. So I think, once again, just going back to the idea of an NT alcohol action plan, it's the local plans, I think, that will work the best. Get behind local people and local proprietors and come up with a plan that suits your community and the dynamic of your community. But going back to what I said before, no matter what, alcoholics will access grog. So the cost of grog, I've always thought, is almost immaterial because of that. The comparison you can make is the sale of tobacco. you've got a situation. I was listening to Radio National program on RN the other day, and they were talking about how the dilemma: do they raise the price of tobacco further? Or they were trying to weigh up the cost of it. And the cost of increasing the cost of tobacco is that now more people are accessing chop or illegal tobacco. And that is an industry that is absolutely flourishing. And when you bring that back to alcohol locally in the Northern Territory, we all know in Alice Springs, and I can't speak for anywhere else, that you increase the price of alcohol or make it inaccessible to any extent, you're just bolstering the demand for illegal alcohol, which, you know, someone else has already talked about. So it's a balancing act. But increasing, putting in a minimum floor price, and I'm open to anything that works, because I've got to a stage in my life where my life and the life of everyone I know living in Alice Springs has been compromised pretty much by the effects of alcohol. So I don't have any prejudice or pre-existing view on anything that could possibly work. But I've never been sold on a minimum floor price. I just don't think it works. There was a study done on the impact of the minimum floor price probably 4 or 5 years ago, whenever it was brought in. That would be on the public record. When was that? 22. It's only a few years ago. And the study was heralded as a great success, and look here, we've got evidence. But at the same time they did the study, the banned drinkers register was reintroduced in its entirety, and all these other things were at play. It would have been virtually impossible to pull it all apart, all the strategies, and separate them and say the minimum floor price is a success. And this piece of research was published in the Medical Journal of Australia, I'm pretty sure, a pretty credible periodical. But yet, reading it, I just had this overwhelming sense of disbelief that people would buy the story that was being told. It wasn't credible. There is no overwhelming evidence for a floor price. I wish there was, because we've wasted a lot of time and energy on implementing this. But from my perspective, it's been of the lowest order when it comes to other strategies, and putting all the strategies in a set of, ordering them in terms of their effectiveness. The minimum floor price, to my mind, is at the bottom. And I'm only sharing this today because I am the speaker and I don't want to be controversial, but I think just giving you that perspective from someone whose life has been all about alcohol policy for many years, even when I was on local government and the last 15 years in this chamber, it's been about alcohol. It's been about the intervention. It's been about the introduction of the 2 p.m. opening hours of alcohol shops in Alice Springs. That's going back to 2008. I was a part of that. I was a part of the debate and the dissatisfaction generally when those things were introduced, because they were so extreme and aggressive. I've gone the full, been on the voyage, I've been on the bandwagon for years, and I've come out the other end absolutely accepting that it is the #1 problem facing us in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory, and we have to do whatever we can to address it, to help people with alcohol problems, to rehabilitate, to find a different path. But more than ever, we have to stop the scourge of alcohol, the access to alcohol, and try and minimise that harm. So my contribution tonight is just that. In my view, the minimum floor price may have had some minor impact, but in the scheme of things, from an Alice Springs perspective, I think it's been insignificant. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Araluen.